They never say it directly. They don't need to. But when Sergio Pérez talks about his Red Bull years now, you can hear it between every pause, between every carefully chosen word. Max Verstappen didn't just beat him, he changed the entire team around him. And according to Pérez, that's exactly why Red Bull stopped working for everyone else. Because here's the uncomfortable truth most fans still haven't accepted. Max Verstappen didn't ruin Red Bull by being difficult. He ruined Red Bull by being too good. And somehow, in 2026, that's exactly why he still rules Formula One. But to understand how we got here, you have to understand what Pérez is really saying. Not what headlines want you to believe, because this story isn't about ego, it's about power, and it starts long before the 2026 regulations ever existed. Let's rewind. When Sergio Pérez joined Red Bull, he wasn't just hired to support Max Verstappen. He was hired to stabilize the team, to be the experienced closer, the calm hand in chaotic races. And at first, it worked. Pérez helped Red Bull win constructors' titles. He played the team game. He defended. He sacrificed. But quietly, something inside the team began to shift. Not because Pérez underperformed, but because Verstappen overperformed. Every year, Max demanded sharper front ends, more nervous cars, more rotation on entry, more instability that only he could control. And Red Bull listened, not because they wanted to ignore Pérez, but because when you have a driver who extracts lap time where physics says there is none, you build around him. Here's the first uncomfortable stat that changes everything. Across multiple seasons, Verstappen consistently extracted more lap time in low grip, unstable conditions than any other driver on the grid. Rain, dirty air, cold tyres, low downforce, that's not normal. And when a team realizes that one driver can unlock performance others can't even feel, the car stops being neutral. It becomes specialized. Pérez felt it. He talked about it without naming it, about confidence disappearing, about setups that never came to him, about feeling like the car changed underneath him from weekend to weekend. And here's the part nobody likes to admit. Red Bull didn't choose Max over Checo emotionally. They chose him mathematically. But here's where the story gets darker. Because once a team commits fully to one driver's instincts, the second driver doesn't just lose pace, he loses belief. And belief is everything in Formula One. Ask yourself this, when was the last time Pérez looked relaxed attacking a corner at Red Bull? Exactly. Now here's the twist nobody expected. When Pérez later reflected on his time at Red Bull, he didn't accuse Max of sabotage. He didn't say the team betrayed him. Instead, he described an environment where everything revolved around one reference point, one feedback loop, one interpretation of performance. And that's where the ruined Red Bull narrative comes from, because Red Bull didn't collapse, it narrowed. They didn't become weaker, they became less flexible. And flexibility is exactly what 2026 is supposed to demand. Which brings us to the part that scares every other team. Because on paper, the 2026 regulations should punish drivers like Max Verstappen. Less downforce, more electrical deployment management, heavier cars, restricted aero surfaces. In theory, this is the era of smoothness, of predictability, of systems drivers. So why are paddock insiders quietly worried? Because Verstappen has already been here before. Karting taught him to drive with zero grip. Early Toro Rosso years taught him to survive unstable platforms. Red Bull's evolution taught him to thrive when cars fight back. And while others learned to extract performance from stability, Max learned to extract performance from instability. Here's a question nobody wants to answer honestly. What happens when instinct is no longer optional, but mandatory? That's where 2026 is heading. Energy deployment windows will demand split-second decisions. Corner entry balance will shift lap to lap. Tyres will punish hesitation. This isn't about who drives smoothest, it's about who adapts fastest. And that's exactly where Verstappen lives. Now pause for a second. If this is making sense so far, you might want to hit like. Not because the algorithm needs it, but because you're about to see Formula One very differently after this. Here's the irony. The same traits that made Pérez feel lost at Red Bull are the traits that make Verstappen dangerous in 2026. total commitment, unfiltered feedback, aggressive setup direction. Max doesn't wait for consensus. He bends the car to him, or breaks it trying. And under tighter regulations, that's an advantage, because when everyone is limited, the driver who lives closest to the limit wins. Now let's address the uncomfortable part. Did Verstappen ruin Red Bull? If you define ruin as making the team impossible for anyone else to succeed in, then yes. But if you define success as winning titles, shaping eras, and forcing regulation changes, then Max didn't ruin Red Bull. He exposed Formula One, exposed how much modern teams rely on driver references, exposed how fragile multi-driver balance really is, exposed how rare true adaptability actually is, and Perez's comments weren't bitterness. They were a warning about what happens when one driver becomes the system. Now here's where things get interesting. Red Bull knows this. That's why Verstappen's engineer stayed loyal into 2026. That's why internal structures didn't reset around neutrality. That's why Max remains central to development philosophy. Even in a new era, they're not afraid of change. They're betting on the one driver who doesn't need stability to survive it. And that should worry everyone else, because when regulations tighten, margins shrink. And when margins shrink, instinct matters more, not less. So ask yourself this: if 2026 punishes comfort, if it punishes predictability, if it punishes hesitation, then why wouldn't Max Verstappen still rule Formula One? And maybe that's the real reason Perez's words hit so hard. Because deep down, he isn't saying Max destroyed Red Bull. He's saying Max redefined what Red Bull became. And Formula One is about to feel the consequences of that again. Before you go, tell me this in the comments. Does 2026 finally level the field? Or does it expose just how far ahead Verstappen really is? And if you want to understand why certain drivers fear this regulation reset more than they admit, watch the next video on your screen, because that story goes even deeper.